At 3 a.m., a chilling 911 call shattered a quiet American suburb. Inside the home, a father lay beaten to death, and standing over him were his wife and her former FBI agent father, claiming it was self-defense. But as investigators dug deeper, one truth became impossible to ignore. This marriage was hiding something far darker than anyone imagined. There are some nights when the world feels perfectly still, when the streetlights stand guard over quiet neighborhoods and the hum of distant traffic becomes the closest thing to a lullaby. But a little after 3 a.m., in a quiet American suburb in North Carolina, that stillness shattered. A breathless voice on the phone, a panicked 911 call a story that didn't quite add up. When paramedics arrived, they walked into a nightmare hiding behind a white picket fence, as if the American dream had been painted beautifully on the outside but was rotting beneath the surface. Inside the house, a man lay bleeding on the bedroom floor.
Welcome to Obrix, where the untold becomes unforgettable. Don't just watch the world, uncover it. Subscribe now.
His name was Jason Corbett, an Irish father of two who had come to the United States for a new beginning. Now, he was unrecognizable. His wife, Molly Martens, stood nearby. Her father, a former FBI agent, was also present. Both looked shaken, as if they had witnessed something they couldn't yet process. But even in those first confused moments, something about the scene felt off. Not chaotic, but staged. Too quiet for the amount of violence that had occurred. Jason's head injuries were catastrophic. The kind so severe that an investigator later described them as far beyond self-defense. A baseball bat lay nearby. A heavy brick paver was on the bedside table. Objects that shouldn't belong in a bedroom, yet somehow had found their way into the story that night. But before understanding how a marriage descended into brutality, you have to go back, far back, to the beginning. To Ireland, where Jason's first wife had died tragically, leaving him alone with two young children, to a man desperate to rebuild his life, to find stability, to give his kids a future filled with warmth instead of grief. When he hired Molly as a nanny, no one could have predicted what the next years would bring. She was young, optimistic, charming. She became part of the family. And eventually, Jason married her, believing he was giving his children a mother and himself a second chance. But second chances don't always lead where we hope they will. Neighbors described Molly as devoted, affectionate, sometimes overly protective of the children. But the people closest to Jason noticed small fractures, tension building in the walls of their home, disagreements over discipline, moments when Molly's temper flared in ways that didn't quite match the situation. Still, nothing explained the brutality of what happened that night. Nothing explained the sheer force used. Nothing explained the story Molly and her father told, that Jason had attacked her, that her father rushed in to save her, that the violence had been necessary. But the investigators weren't convinced. The cuts on Molly didn't look like defensive wounds. The bat had blood on the handle, suggesting someone gripped it tightly. Jason's injuries weren't consistent with a single blow or a quick struggle. They were repetitive, intentional, personal. The house was too tidy for the panic described. And then there were the children, Jason's son and daughter, asleep down the hall that night. When social workers gently asked them what they remembered, what they had seen before, their quiet answers would become the first cracks in Molly's story. But the saddest part of this tragedy is that long before the crime happened, long before the violence, long before the 911 call echoed into the night, Jason had begun to fear the very person he once trusted most. He had considered leaving. He had spoken to friends about tension at home. He had told family members he wanted to bring his children back to Ireland, and that Molly didn't want him to. In stories like this, violence feels sudden. But the truth is, it usually begins with a whisper, a suppressed argument, a growing resentment, a choice not to walk away. And on that night, when the paramedics carried Jason's lifeless body out of the home, no one yet knew that this case would become one of the most complicated, controversial, and emotionally charged trials America had seen in years. A marriage that promised healing had ended in horror, and every person inside that house had a different version of what the truth looked like, but only one version would match the evidence. And the deeper investigators dug, the more they realized this wasn't a story of self-defense. It was a story of control, of obsession, of a family divided by fear. And the truth, the real truth, was far darker than anyone imagined. To understand the night Jason Corbett died, you have to understand the three people who shaped the story: Jason, Molly, and her father, Thomas Martens. Their lives intersected like lines destined to collide, each bringing their own wounds, their own fears, their own unresolved pasts into a home that looked perfect from the outside. When Molly first stepped into Jason's life, she wasn't a wife. She was a nanny, someone hired to help him manage the impossible weight of grief. Jason's first wife had died from an asthma attack in the middle of the night. One moment she was breathing, the next she was gone. His world broke, not slowly, but instantly. In that fracture, Molly became a light, energetic, hopeful, eager to fill the silence that grief left behind. Jason's family said she loved the children immediately, but love isn't always the same thing as stability. And over time, small tensions emerged, the kind that don't seem dangerous at first, but influence everything that follows. One thing this story reminds us of is how fast life can change. Jason Corbett never expected the worst to happen inside his own home. Most people don't. We walk through life assuming we're safe. That danger is something distant, something that happens to other families in other towns. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. When violence happens, it happens fast. No warning, no time to think, only moments to react. And that's why I want to share something that isn't just a product. It's something I honestly believe every person should know. There's a self-defense training program created by one of the world's most experienced tactical trainers. It teaches the #1 move to survive and escape an attack, whether someone grabs you from behind, threatens you with a weapon, or corners you when you least expect it. And the crazy part is, it's simple. Anyone can do it. You don't need to be strong. You don't need martial arts training. You just need to know exactly what to do in those first critical seconds. Because if there's one thing Jason's story teaches us, it's this. You can't control what other people do, but you can control how prepared you are. If you want to learn this life-saving technique, you can check it out in the link below. Even knowing just one move could make all the difference for you or someone you love. Molly wanted to adopt the children. Jason hesitated. He loved her, but some part of him wasn't ready to rewrite the memory of his first wife. Family members would later say that Molly began to resent that hesitation, feeling like she was forever living in the shadow of a woman she never met. And then there was Thomas, a retired FBI agent, disciplined, protective, a man who spent decades staring into the darkest parts of humanity and believed he could always spot danger. When Molly complained about Jason, Thomas listened. When she cried, he worried. When she said she felt unsafe, he believed her. That belief became the fatal fuse investigators later learned that Molly had exaggerated Jason's temper, that she portrayed herself as a victim, trapped, threatened, overlooked Thomas, shaped by a lifetime of responding to threats, responded to this one too. Not as a civilian, but as a man who had training, instincts, and a paternal need to protect his daughter at any cost. By the time the night of the killing arrived, fear had been building inside that home like pressure inside a sealed chamber. But here's the contradiction. No one who knew Jason described him as violent, not colleagues, not friends, not neighbors, not family, not even his children. Instead, they described a gentle father, a man who cooked breakfast on Saturday mornings, a man who cried quietly at the mention of his first wife, a man who wanted to go home to Ireland, not because he feared Molly, but because he wanted simpler days for his kids. But Molly's narrative painted a different picture. A marriage filled with sudden anger, intimidation, threats. A picture that grew darker each time she shared it with her father. Whether she believed her own stories or used them to manipulate is the haunting unknown. But what we do know is this. The night Jason died, Thomas Martens was visiting his daughter. He arrived with a baseball bat, not something most people pack for an overnight stay. When asked why, he said it was meant for protection. Protection from what? He never could fully explain. The prosecution argued the truth was simpler. The bat wasn't brought by coincidence. It was brought because the confrontation wasn't spontaneous. It was expected. Inside the house that night, two versions of reality collided. Jason's belief that he was trying to repair a broken marriage, and Molly's belief that she was trapped in one somewhere in the middle, lines blurred. Who raised their voice first? Who stepped forward? Who reached for the bat? No one knows for certain, but what the evidence shows is that Jason didn't just fall. He didn't just get hit once or twice. The blows continued until his skull shattered. This wasn't panic. It was fury. What happened in that room wasn't self-defense. It was an explosion years in the making, fueled by fear, resentment, misunderstandings, and the kind of emotional instability that grows when people stop communicating and start imagining the worst in each other. And when the room finally fell silent, the cost wasn't just Jason's life. It was the destruction of a family that had already lost too much. And the trial would reveal just how deep the fractures truly went. Trials are supposed to uncover the truth, but in cases like this, the truth doesn't arrive cleanly. It arrives in fragments, testimony shaped by memory, emotion shaped by fear, evidence shaped by interpretation. The courtroom felt like a pressure chamber the day Molly and Thomas Martens took their seats. On one side, Jason's Irish family, grieving a second tragedy in less than a decade. On the other, Molly's family, insisting she was a victim, not a perpetrator. Between them sat a jury tasked with answering a question that felt almost impossible. Was this self-defense or a brutal killing disguised as one? The prosecution began with the evidence. They described the scene not as a struggle, but as an attack. Jason's skull had multiple fractures, the kind usually seen in car crashes or severe beatings. The blows weren't random, they were deliberate, targeted. And then came the children, Jason's young daughter and son, the only living witnesses to the months leading up to their father's death. Their statements were heartbreaking. They described arguments, they described tension. But when asked whether their father ever physically hurt Molly, they said no. They had never seen him be violent. Not once. One investigator later admitted those words hit harder than any piece of forensic evidence, because children rarely lie about the things that scare them. The defense painted a different story. They portrayed Jason as volatile, unpredictable, emotionally unstable. They claimed Molly was terrified of him, that she was trapped, that she feared for her life. But every time the defense pushed that narrative, the prosecution countered with the same question. Why were there no witnesses? No friends who saw bruises? No doctors who treated injuries? No police reports? No documented threats? The fear, it seemed, lived only in Molly's words. Nowhere else. And then came the detail that made the courtroom shift uncomfortably. Thomas Martens, a former FBI agent with decades of training, claimed he struck Jason repeatedly in fear and panic. But experts pointed out something critical. A trained agent doesn't panic like that, not with a baseball bat, not with force that continues long after the threat is neutralized. The jury listened, carefully, quietly, and when the verdict finally came, it hit like a weight dropped from the ceiling. Guilty, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter. Jason's family wept. Molly's family collapsed in disbelief. The courtroom felt like a place where grief had pooled on all sides, leaving no one untouched. But perhaps the most haunting part of the trial wasn't what was said. It was what lingered unsaid. Because underneath all the testimony, the expert opinions, the heated arguments, one question remained suspended in the air. Did Molly truly believe her own fear? Or did she create it? Was she protecting herself from danger? Or was she protecting herself from losing control? The verdict closed a chapter, but not the story. Because in the years that followed, lawyers appealed, judges reconsidered evidence, and new motions reopened wounds that never fully healed. Jason's children were brought back to Ireland, a place they once knew as home, now a refuge from the trauma they survived. And Molly's family continued to insist the verdict was wrong, that the truth was still buried, waiting to be uncovered. But the truth, like broken glass, isn't always easy to pick up. Sometimes it cuts everyone who tries to hold it, and the deeper you look into this case, the clearer one thing becomes. There are no winners here, only loss, only pain. Only the echo of a marriage that began with hope and ended in horror. In the aftermath of tragedy, the world moves in strange ways. People return to their routines. Houses get resold. News cycles shift. New stories demand attention. But for the people touched by this case, for Jason's children, for his family, even for Molly's, the story never really ends. The home where he died has long since been repainted, cleaned, reclaimed by new owners who sleep unaware of the history in their walls. The neighborhood has gone quiet again, but grief leaves fingerprints, and though invisible, they linger. Jason's children, now older, carry memories heavier than most adults can fathom. For them, the night of their father's death isn't a documentary. It's not something they watched, it's something they lived, something whispered about in courtrooms, something replayed in their minds in ways words can never fully express. And Molly, her life didn't end the night Jason's did, but everything she once knew fractured. Whether she truly believed her own fear or let it consume her, the result was the same. A life built on hope collapsed into ruin. Even her father, a man once respected for his service, now carries a legacy marked by violence, controversy, and moral ambiguity. His belief that he was protecting his daughter may have been genuine, but belief doesn't erase consequences. The legal battles continued for years, reopened wounds, sparked headlines, and reignited public debate. How do we determine truth when two people claim fear? How do we measure intent inside a moment of chaos? How do we restore lives that can't be unbroken? There are no easy answers. Domestic violence, whether real, imagined, or weaponized, is a storm that doesn't just strike the home. It strikes everyone around it. Friends, parents, children, entire communities. And in the quiet moments after the storm, people search for closure. But closure is a myth, especially in cases like this. Because this story isn't just about a murder. It's about the fragility of relationships, the danger of unresolved fear, the lengths people go to protect the ones they love, or themselves, even when their perception of danger becomes distorted. It's a reminder that the walls of a home can hide unspeakable truths. That darkness doesn't just live in alleys or abandoned buildings. It can grow inside beautifully decorated living rooms, behind smiling photos, inside marriages that look perfect on Instagram. This case forces us to confront something uncomfortable. You never really know what happens behind closed doors. You never know when love can turn violent, when fear can turn deadly, when protection can become destruction. In the end, the court determined Molly and her father were guilty, but verdicts don't remove pain. They don't restore the past. They don't breathe life back into the dead. Jason Corbett's story ends with tragedy, but it also leaves a message behind, one quietly carried by his children, one whisper by those who loved him. Pay attention. Listen closely. Don't ignore the quiet signs that something is wrong, because sometimes the deadliest storms begin with the softest winds, and sometimes the most dangerous place in the world isn't a dark alley or a distant battlefield. It's the home you thought would keep you safe.